So, pretty much I'm going to just let Dr. Jessica go into, kind of some of the ways in which co-ops and incremental community development can build wealth in our communities, and why we should really and why we should really look at these models as ways for not only the African American community, but also any community that is vulnerable to when capital moves in and out of your neighborhood, so we're not necessarily left with communities that are completely decimated by that kind of shift of capital. So right now, and through the 70s to 80s to 90s, we saw a lot of capital move out, which is prominently known as white flight. And now we're seeing the reverse happening when investments and everything are coming back into the community, and how when capital left, it devastated because it left a lot of the services and the resources, and it really strained city governments, to now we're seeing it all coming back. And how do we balance that? Also, how can we protect ourselves from those kind of ebbs and flows?
So you partly know my answer, which is we need to do more co-op ownership. I promised you that I would finish talking about wealth creation through co-op, so let me start with that, and then maybe we can go back to kind of talking about what to do here in Grand Rapids and what might work or what doesn't work. So because co-ops are a joint ownership strategy of an economic enterprise, usually, especially if it's successful, it's going to have some profit, or in the co-op world, we actually call it surplus, because profit's supposed to be a dirty word, but everything needs profit in the sense of you need to make more than you put in so that you can keep doing what you do, and so you can upgrade and grow and add and whatever. So it's not that we don't want profit, it's that we don't want profit to be the only reason why you do something, or the only product of what you do. But that pooling of scarce resources, and in my work I also don't really just, even though I'm an economist, I'm not just interested in financial resources or real estate or that kind of thing. I really found, especially in studying co-ops, that we really care about social capital, right? And the ways that people work together, teamwork, the ways that people use sweat equity and other kinds of energy and activity to put toward making a project happen and making it profitable. The ways that we learn leadership development, the way we develop ways to work together and make decisions together, all actually impact how well a company, particularly a co-op, operates and what else it can give back. So this sharing of resources is really important, because even if you don't have $1,000 to put into a co-op, you have your time, your energy, connections that you can make with other people, the enthusiasm you have that helps people stay together, et cetera, and really you can't undermine or underestimate how much that matters. Like a co-op in Gary, Indiana in the 1930s, they came together. It was actually teachers and a principal from the local black high school came together because they were suffering from the Great Depression, and the last bank had left their neighborhood. They already didn't have a grocery store, they didn't have a gas station, and now they didn't have a bank. So they came together to talk about what's going on, what's happening. Somebody in their membership said, oh, I've heard about this co-op ownership. So they started studying that. They actually went on a study tour and went to some other co-ops, one in Chicago, I think one in Richmond, and they went to see what they were doing. They put a co-op education course in their night school. Remember the days when schools had night school for continuing ed, which became the largest subscribed night school course in 1933 of any of the courses they had in their night school. And then they eventually, after studying and working together, they decided to open up their own co-op grocery store, which they did. The next year they opened a credit union and a gas station. In 2 years they opened a second grocery store. They ended up being able to give back 2% in dividends, meaning in addition to if you worked there or if you were a co-owner, in addition to getting whatever out of the co-op, whichever co-op it was, the store or the gas station, whatever, getting your services and reduced price and stuff for the co-op, every year you got 2% back on all the business you did at that co-op. So that was a wealth building piece. So you can see in that way, so they pooled knowledge, energy, etc., put together enough to open these businesses. Their grocery store was actually considered the largest grossing black grocery store in the country in 1933 or 34. So again, you can see that. You can also leverage resources once you do this pooling of resources. So that North Carolina group I talked about earlier, one of the things they wanted with their health insurance program was they decided they needed a full-time nurse in their health clinic. They pooled together enough money to pay half of a full-time nurse through their program, and they also had dues to cover if you had to get hospitalization, that kind of thing, but they could only pay for a half-time nurse. But they went to the state health department, told them what they had done, showed them how much money they had amassed, and they got the health department to match the cost of the other half of the nurse, so they ended up with a full-time nurse. So again, that leveraging pooling then leads you to leverage things. It gives you access to other things because you've done the pooling and the working together the first time. Oh shoot, my notes. Anyway, another organization I think I mentioned earlier, Cooperative Home Care Associates. Home care work, if any of you know, is very unskilled, very temporary. You usually don't even get 40 hours a week. It's very hard work, even though it's unskilled. The group that started was actually a nonprofit that started this for-profit Cooperative Home Care Associates, and they did several different things. One, they wanted to bring together people who had few skills and who were on welfare or had been unemployed for a long time or had challenges getting work. They wanted to provide them with good skills so that when they were in the market for home care workers, they would rise above the regular crowd. So they wanted to train them on really personal skills and how to really do the job of home care well. And so they actually started their own nonprofit training center that fed into the for-profit home care business. They brought people in with no skills, trained them in a way that they would get really important skills that people would want to hire them for. And they also did advocacy on the outside. They got the city of New York and the state of New York to change the way they allocated Medicare money for home care so that you could pay home care more. So they actually got the wages raised statewide and citywide for any home care person so that when they wanted to charge higher rates and competitive rates for home care, it wouldn't be so out of the ballpark. So they were able to actually provide living wages. They took women who were unbanked and they helped them to be banked by suggesting that they could give them automatic deposit if they opened a bank account. They eventually were able to give them retirement and health care by joining the union, the local SCIU 1099 union, so that all the members are union members. The union then is able to provide them with a pension and health care. They give them benefits like sick leave and vacation time, and then they also are able to pool together 40-hour weeks for them because they're not just working for one person, right? They're working for a company that has lots of different contracts, and so if one of the jobs they have is only 15 hours or 30 hours, they can fill in the other hours with work that the company has. That company also spun off a disabilities care, home care work, and so they have a disability center that's separate, that's also a for-profit, and that's where the combined training center, the home care, and the disabilities together are the largest worker co-op in the United States, and they also give back dividends after the first 3 years. Any profitable year, they give 25% back on your equity. You have to pay $1,000 to join to be a member, but for almost all the years that they've been in existence since 1987, they've been able to pay 25% a year back in dividends. So in 4 years, you've made your money, your investment back, and you still have your investment in a thriving company. So you can see again all the different ways that wealth gets built between the pension fund, between getting you banked, between giving you living wages with fringe benefits, and then you get, above all that, you're getting these dividends back on the equity because you're an owner. And so that's the kind of process, the kind of ownership structure that I'm thinking of can really bring wealth to a community in a way that's not exploitative, but also is addressing needs in a community and the needs of ownership and work.
Where are they?
In South Bronx
Oh, right.
of New York.
I didn't know the format was it like Q&A or we just talking? I didn't even come with notes.
I think we're supposed to be making some opening remarks and then maybe opening it up for questions. How about that?
Okay, that works for me. To piggyback off of Dr. Nipard, leveraging resources and integrating those resources in creative ways to get cooperatives going, I think is very beneficial. So for instance, it's tax time, earned income tax credits, child care tax credits are available to a lot of low to moderate income people. And I know there's various movements across the nation to get those people into the banking system. So that is a way to leverage in terms of investment in cooperatives. Also, anchor institutions. I know at home in Kalamazoo we have a couple colleges. I think all of them teach business, but none of them teach cooperative businesses. So integrating that into their curriculum could be a way to introduce cooperatives to the community as well. And also in Kalamazoo we have Michigan Works. It's a statewide organization, and they have received some federal money to provide free training to any organization in the community as long as it's related to employment. So like financial literacy, I asked them about entrepreneurship, that's available, again, as long as it connects with employability. So that's another way to integrate cooperatives into something that's already being done, right? And so leveraging, I think, is the best way to get it in. Many times, I know I've been in spaces, I mentioned cooperatives, and people's eyes glaze over. Then I mentioned worker cooperatives, and it's really like, what's going on here? So, not just integrating into all the services and resources that we already have, and not making it seem like it's something brand new. I've encountered a lot of resistance when people think it's a sharp shift or a sharp change in direction. But when it's something that they're already doing, and this cooperative piece can add value to what they're already delivering, then it's an easier sale, so to speak.
Yeah, I would also add on that a lot of times we're already doing cooperative stuff, but not necessarily officially, right? So we're often doing barter with other people. As you said, there's lots of other things. So sometimes it's just a matter of seeing what we're doing and trying to figure out how to raise it a notch, right? Or increase the scale, or involve more people or something. So again, it's not like we're saying start something that's totally different from you, or that's something you don't need or whatever, but address a need that's already there, think about what you're already doing, see how you can raise it up a notch, that kind of thing. Another way that I've been talking about wealth is to think about even the increase, just increasing income or reducing costs. So like your food co-op, it may not be reducing the cost for every product in your store, but there's some of your products that you're able to provide for less money or higher quality than some other place. So even that is a help to a budget, right? If somebody's on a fixed budget and they can get better quality food for the same price, or better food or better quality food for less price, then they've got a margin, they've got some extra money they can do something with. So that helps too, to be able to think about well-being. It may not be that you have a lot of money to invest in wealth or whatever, but well-being. I've been also toying with the notion about community wealth and thinking about, instead of all of us trying to just own property by ourselves or own stocks and bonds for ourselves. What if we were thinking about community wealth, right? The wealth that we would have within our community-owned businesses or the community assets, the things that we all own as a community because we're members of community. If we could increase the volume and the quality of the things that we already share, then that's also another form of wealth. If we could use co-op businesses and other collective ways to do things to enhance our quality of life, well, that's another kind of wealth. Maybe we don't have to have a stock portfolio, or our stock portfolio can be a little smaller because other things are being met because of the collective stuff we do. It's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, again, Pollyanna-ish, right? But on the other hand, sometimes it's the most practical thing we can do because not everybody's going to have a stock portfolio. Not everybody can invest in a real estate project, right? So thinking about what are the ways that as a community we can at least meet our needs and have some prosperity together, I think are important. And the last thing I would like to talk about is youth co-ops. I'm a real proponent of getting our young people, even as early as middle school, but particularly high school and in their 20s, to get them involved in co-op ownership, both to solve community problems that they're concerned about, but also to get them the experience of running their own business, of collectively making decisions and collectively figuring out what to do with the surplus, and also gaining skills. Again, anyway, I'll wing it. But there's a couple of youth co-ops I've been studying, and we're finding a bunch of stuff, especially the ones for high school students. They not only provide them with an experience, but they also sometimes give them the extra motivation and skills to do better in school. So if you're running your own business, you actually have to know some math, right? Especially co-ops are transparent, usually use open book management, meaning everybody has to look at the financial pages, make financial decisions, be able to read the financial reports. Well, then you're doing better in your math class. Or you might actually take a math class that you didn't think you were interested in before, because it's going to enhance your ability in your co-op to make your business. You're going to learn, you're going to read and write and speak better, because in your co-op you have to market your co-op. You have to speak up at the meetings, you have to talk, right? You're going to be engaged with other adults, especially your adult mentors, so you're going to, the intergenerational connections are going to be there. You're actually making money, so there may be things you can do with the money. The co-op Food from the Hood, which started out in Crenshaw High School in the South Central LA. They started with a school garden. They wanted to give the food away to the homeless, so they started doing that, but then they learned about farmers markets, so they started selling some of their produce in farmers markets and realized they had some money in their pockets. Then they were learning business and learned about that you could make more money doing value added to your produce, so they decided to make salad dressing. This is 1992 to the early 2000s. They made salad dressing, and then they realized that instead of just selling it at the farmers markets or selling it from their school, they could sell it online. They actually sold their salad dressing through Amazon. This was the early days of Amazon being an online marketplace. So they would sell their salad dressing through Amazon. In 10 years, and they voted that half of the proceeds would go into savings accounts so that when they graduated, they would have money to go to college with. In 10 years, they had allocated $180,000 to about 77 of their member owners who graduated from high school and were therefore able to go on to college. The school actually put in a college prep program because now they had kids who actually had a chance to go to college because they had money that they had earned, saved up, that could be then matched with other scholarships so they could go to college. So in addition to all the stuff they gained by just being in a co-op and making business decisions and stuff, they also had these other opportunities. Similar examples like that, there's Toxic Soil Busters in Worcester, Massachusetts. They're an after-school program, but they do lead abatement. They started out learning about the problem with lead abatement because somebody's little brother was eating the dirt outside their house and got lead poisoning because they're in the brownfields and the soil is contaminated in their neighborhood. So they got upset about it, so they learned all about it. They created a company, a co-op, to help do lead abatement, soil lead abatement, and to build above raised beds. They found a company that would test the soil. They did that. They also went into video production because they ended up doing so much marketing about what's the issue, what we can do to help you. They realized they could also learn marketing and video production, etc. Again, lots of leadership gets developed, training and money. And most of them went off onto college too and other things. They also have to train new members because they're students and they're going to move. They're going to leave school or leave the area to go to college or whatever, and so they also end up with training program to bring in more young people to take over when they go. So there's that whole kind of cycle, a seamless cycle. So to me, that's really a great way to start. You get students and young people already learning how to do this, and then when they're adults, co-op is just second nature to them. Should we open to questions?
Yes. So anyone have any questions? I'll grab the mic and run around.
See one person over here.
All right, you got a question? You sure you have anything to add, Kevin?
No, not right now.
All right.
There you go.
A concern I have, and I don't know if there's answers, but maybe just to raise awareness of it. We talk about the commons and common ownership of property. Something I'm aware of that has happened in two instances. One being the Gullah population of the coastal islands, where their culture was common ownership, but like has happened in Central and South America, it wasn't documented. In this country, how that's manifested is some of the family members who have left the community, may have not lived in it in generations, can then go and sell what is their rights because of the tradition of that community and actually break up the community so that the people still living there are greatly harmed. And then I know York Center Cooperative, which is a housing community started outside of Chicago. That was a co-op community that was actually founded at a time when diversity in housing was not commonly available. And for, I'm not sure how many years, probably 40 or 50 years existed. And then as the Chicago area, the property values raised even outside the city, one or two members who were profit-driven took it to court, and apparently individual, in a capitalist-driven society, that the rights of an individual to profit supersedes the contract they had agreed to in it. So how do we, I don't know, there's something just to keep in mind, is there some way to structure it so that these things don't happen?
Yeah, I've heard of some of those problems. I didn't hear about the one outside of Chicago. My understanding is, and I don't know if we have housing co-op experts, if it's actually housing co-op under the co-op law, I think it's harder to divide it that way or to let some individual do that. So I can't speak to that particular case, but let me speak in general to the issue. So there's a variety of ways to do cooperation and collectivism, etc. Each state, some states have better or worse laws. Most states have a credit union law, and credit unions are cooperatives. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say about wealth building. You can do it through credit unions, which are non-predatory lending places. But anyway, and then you can do, most states have agricultural co-op laws about creating agricultural co-ops, which are usually secondary level co-ops for processing and marketing. Not all states have good housing co-op laws. Most states don't have worker co-op laws. So one of the things we are working on in the co-op movement is getting those, what we call uniform co-op laws. So it's possible that if you're in a state that doesn't have a strong co-op law, that could happen. Wisconsin actually has a co-op law that says if the co-op dissolves, whatever assets are left in the co-op have to go to another co-op. Just like with a nonprofit, if a nonprofit dissolves, the assets have to go to another nonprofit, they can't go to the individuals. So in a place like Wisconsin, you couldn't have that happen because it's already part of the law if you incorporate as a co-op. Now, if you didn't incorporate it as a co-op, then that's another problem. Sometimes you can incorporate it as something else, and then you don't have as many protections. So part of it is just making sure we have a legal advisors who actually know the difference between which laws and can help advise you about which laws. But we're also trying to get more laws like Wisconsin about, I think what it's called, indivisibility or something. Anyway, that law that if you agree to become a co-op, then one of the rules is that if the co-op dissolves, you can pay back to the member owners what they deserve, but any reserves, any extra that's left in that co-op has to be donated to another co-op or put into a co-op development fund. Quebec has that also. That's actually how they get some of their co-op development fund money, is the assets of the co-op that has dissolved or has changed or whatever go into a co-op development fund, and then other co-ops can use that money to develop. So that's where trying to be sure about your structure is important, especially if you're worried about having rogue members or that kind of thing. We have a lot of worker co-ops that are started as LLCs because it's actually simpler to do a limited liability corporation and then have your bylaws as a co-op, meaning the bylaws say that you operate as a co-op with one person, one vote, and democracy and all that. But if you do that, then you definitely have to build in, you have to put into your incorporation papers that indivisibility clause, otherwise you're not under actual co-op law even though you're operating as a co-op. So those are things you need to be aware of if you're developing a co-op, and you hope that your co-op lawyer knows that, and if they don't, you can send your co-op lawyer to co-op lawyers who do know how to do that kind of thing. In terms of the South Carolina, my understanding there is there's air property issues even for places that don't have co-op ownership. But in the black community, we've lost a lot of black land because often property is doesn't have a will. The owners don't have a will, and so it doesn't say explicitly what happens, and so anybody who has a claim, any relative can claim the land. And often the relatives are people who've moved away and don't care about land ownership or farming or whatever. In that case, again, the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund helps black groups with that throughout the South. And they suggest two things. One is to make sure all the properties have a will and that the will is very explicit about what should happen to the land. But the other thing, especially for the groups like in the Sea Islands and stuff who have that cooperative tradition, they probably need to formally become co-ops. So that then, when a family member or a member of the co-op dies, it's not that their family gets a share and gets to sell off their share. Their family gets to be a part of the co-op, and then they can decide to stay in the co-op or not. So again, that's more about, I think it's about legal advice about how to do things so it can perpetuate itself as a co-op. But it's also education. I think we have so little discussion about these other alternatives, right, that people don't really know. They don't think about collective ownership. They don't know the rights and responsibilities of collective ownership. It's not the first thing they think of when they think about amassing wealth or owning something. And so to me, I would love us to start like in kindergarten, talking about cooperative economics and how to do things together. We also need people to know how to make decisions together, because we don't know how to do that either, right? We know how to cajole people into agreeing with us, right? And we know how to take a vote so you can get one more vote to get a majority than the rest, and then leave all the other people who voted no out, right? But we don't know how to come to consensus or how to get, work on how to come to a common decision that's going to help everybody. So all that kind of stuff we need to really pay attention to. So in some ways we need to change our school system, as well as, make sure we get these uniform laws. So there's a lot of work to do, but on the other hand, we can also just start doing this stuff, understand that there are some of these barriers, try to work on the barriers at the same time that we're actually doing stuff.
I would add to that in terms of community wealth building and opportunities to really look at succession planning. There are a lot of baby boomers who own businesses, and their children do not want to take over those businesses. So they're just going to go out of business. They can't find anybody to sell to. It keeps jobs rooted locally. I know in Kalamazoo, there's a hardware store that's that's been open over 100 years is closing. They tried to sell it, nobody was up to buy it. I'm unaware if they even knew about employee ownership or having that as an option, but just to have people who are aware that succession planning is very important, not just the startup business plan, but eventually you're going to leave this business, and what does that want to look like? Have you considered employee ownership? Have you considered having it baked into your succession plan when you leave? The employees there could be trained to run that business and keep it going. So in addition to Dr. Nemhard's advocacy around youth being involved in co-ops, that's another area that's worth exploring as well, and it's a ripe area for opportunity is succession planning in these local businesses where, especially baby boomers who own them, who are getting up in age and their kids don't want to take over. They having a hard time finding buyers to keep jobs rooted locally and to introduce this cooperative and collective decision making in business ownership.
So my question was going to be, are you aware of a national organization that has conferences on the cooperative, and could you give that information?
There is, I want to say, National Workers Cooperative. U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. There's Democracy at Work. Democracy at Work Network. They have training and I want to say conferences. What'd you say?
The National Cooperative Business Association.
Yeah.
NASCO has a nice conference that she was just at.
Yeah, North American Students of Cooperation, they actually meet every November in Ann Arbor, so that's an easy one to go to. They're mostly young people who do student co-op housing, but there are also other housing co-op people there, and then there's people like me who are in the co-op movement but not in the housing co-op movement who go, because we also have, there's some other tracks where you can talk about major issues. They always have a keynote speaker, and they have a training session on how to start, especially housing co-op. They have sessions on how to run good meetings, how to do consensus building, etc. The U.S. Federation of Southern Cooperatives also has a conference with the Southern Grassroots Economies Project. We now have a conference every October in Alabama. The U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops just had their national meeting in Austin with the DOWI, the Democracy at Work Network. So they will have one again in 2018. In 2017 will be the regional worker co-op conferences. The Eastern Conference is going to be in New York City in June 9th through 11th. The Western Co-op Conference, I think, is in Portland this year in September. Association of Cooperative Educators meets in Denver in July. And then there's also the National Co-op Grocers. Is that what? NCG has a meeting, what, in June? June sometime?
I'm not sure, but yeah.
National Co-op Grocers, that's for co-op grocery stores. And then I saw
There's also a training for food co-op startups that'll be in Milwaukee. Sorry.
There's a training for food co-op startups in Milwaukee. That's usually in what, March or something.
Someone behind you, someone to say?
So that's a lot of organization names kind of thrown out at once. Is there a way to capture those so people can get, I see people writing and then I see them giving up. So how do people here get that information?
Can you send something out? Yeah, I was going to try to write it now, but maybe it's easier if we just send it to you and you send it out.
Yeah, so whoever registered, we have your emails, we'll send it out, and then I'll also make a post about it on our social media and website.
There's also, we can add, maybe there's some websites that do co-op 101s online, so you can take some online courses There's sites that just have co-op materials that you can read about, so we could try to put together a whole resource list for you guys that would help. So there's a growing interest, and it seems like a growing number of activities, depending on how deep you want to get into it. But there are ways to actually get trained. Dowie also does actually a certification to help you become a co-op developer, that kind of thing. So there's, depending on how far you want to go with this.
All right, are there any more questions before we move on to?
I just wanted to share about some of the co-op work that's already going on in town that you may not be aware of. There's a flyer out on the table about a new food co-op startup, and that's going to be in the central part of town and hopefully serve a neighborhood or two that is food challenged right now. And it'll be a full service grocery store, room for carts in the aisles, parking outside, and the members will own the store and run the store. They'll hire the professionals to run the store. They'll hire people from the neighborhood. We're very excited about that, and we're just in the development plan. And we need much more buy-in from every community in town so that we meet all the needs. So if you want to get involved with that, send us an email. All the information's out there. There's also some housing co-op work going on in town with affordable housing, especially in the Heritage Hill area. And if you want to send me an email through the food co-op, I can let you know more about the housing co-ops. And there's a group hub co-op starting up and a bicycle co-op that I know of.
All right, thank you. So, any last words from the panel? Kevin, Jessica?
I'll just say two more things. One, the other thing to look at is credit unions. They're nonprofit financial cooperatives that are created and owned by consumers, by the people who make the deposits. The problem with credit unions is we often don't think of them as co-ops, so most of us, even if we're depositors at a credit union, we don't vote for the board of directors, we don't participate, but we could. Some of the larger ones really act more like banks, but they actually are mandated to do certain things, like to give you a higher return on your savings and to give you a more decent loan. They do keep the money recirculating locally. You can run for the board. There's smaller credit unions, which are called community development credit unions, which are specifically mandated. Their mission is to do community development in low-income communities. It's really hard to start one now because the feds are really nervous about very small credit unions, but often you can get a credit union to do a branch in your neighborhood if you have enough people who really want to do it. And in the past, at least for African Americans, and I assume other groups too, have used credit unions as a way of where to place whatever money savings they do have so they can do banking, but also then that money can then get reinvested in community projects. And the loan processes are usually a little bit more favorable, the mortgages are a little easier to get, they're non-predatory lenders, not just because they're non-profit, but because they're community-owned, that kind of thing. So it's another way to think about wealth, both individual and community wealth, and another way to think about doing co-op type of stuff. And then finally, I just wanted to say one of the really things that I love about co-ops is how flexible they are. That if you, really it's basically those principles about democratic governance and one share, one vote, and create a business based on values and need, serving each other and working together. If you keep those values in place, you can really use a co-op to do almost anything. And again, you do have to worry sometimes about the form to make sure it's a form that will be lasting and can't be subverted. But most of the time, most of the stuff we think about, especially if we really care about community and not just ourselves, we can find a model or we can design a co-op model that will work for whatever issue or project or need that's out there. So I really encourage people because it's a fun way to try to get stuff done. And you can start small and build up, or you can stay small. But you really can come together to address a need together and then work from there.
So I just got a couple things. One, in terms of what's from Dr. Nimhard's book, the importance of study groups. So I know sometimes starting a cooperative could seem overwhelming, a lot of paperwork involved, a paradigm shift in terms of how we make decisions as a collective. We haven't been socialized to do that, so that could add challenges. So the study groups are a very low-touch, high-impact way to ease into that and get people comfortable and acclimated to the idea and to really experiment and to have those discussions before, you know, anybody signs their name to something and you're stuck. You know, because at the end of the day, cooperatives are also businesses, right? It's just there's decisions, how decisions are made and how the benefits are distributed is the primary difference. But at the end of the day, they're businesses and the market can be brutal. So if the study group or the people that want to start a cooperative really aren't cohesive, really don't have a solid relationship, that's not going to bode well for a business. And as a cooperative, with this idea of collectiveness, when one cooperative fails, it kind of like puts a black eye on the rest of the cooperatives. Everybody within the status quo is looking like, yeah, that didn't work. See, we had it right. And so it's very important in the beginning, have those study groups, have those hard discussions before moving forward into anything in depth. Second, on the point of leveraging, credit unions are a good resource. Also, traditional banks. The traditional banks have to follow the Community Reinvestment Act. Most of them don't follow it to the extent and degree to which they can, where communities that they serve benefit. Most of them create little brochures and that's it. And they say we followed our Community Reinvestment Act requirements. So pressing the traditional banks to get more involved. Also, community development financial institutions, CDFIs are another way. Most cities have them. That's another way to leverage the resources that are already there to get cooperatives more in the mainstream.
All right, thank you. Really appreciate you.